We're discussing the opinion of the Rosh that if you ate the matzah without a seiva, you did not fulfill your obligation. And the Rosh derives this with a diuk from the Gemara about shamash. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that if a shamash ate a kizayis matzah and he was masiv, he did a seiva yotza. And the Rosh is medayik that if he hadn't done the seiva and he just ate a kizayis matzah without a seiva, he did not fulfill his obligation. That was the Rosh. So now we're going to start the Brisker Rav on the left column on page 14, and that's Perek Zayin Halacha Tes. And this will touch on a lot of the discussions that we've had in the past about the nature and the definition of Daled Kosos. The Rambam says, Shasa Arba Kosos Elu Mi Yayin She'eno Mozik. So we're talking about Yayin Chai, concentrated wine. And the Rambam writes, Yotza Yidei Arba Kosos, but Velo Yotza Yidei Cherus. And Cherus depends upon a tasty wine, that's Oreblo, and that's diluted wine. Shasa Arba Kosos Mizugim. In this case, he did dilute the wine, but b'masachas. He drank them consecutively. And here the Rambam says, Yidei Cheres Yotza, since he has Yayin Mozug, he fulfills his mitzvah of Cheres, but Arba Kosos Lo Yotza. And that's the language of the Rambam. Now, even before we get to read the Brisker Rav, we should point out that the Rambam has, in both cases of Yayin Chai and Vavasachas, the issue of Yidei Arba Kosos. And whereas in Yayin Chai he does fulfill his mitzvah of Arba Kosos, but in the case of Vavasachas, he does not fulfill his mitzvah of Arba Kosos. The flip side will be true with regard to Cherus. In the case of Yayin Chai, he forfeits the kiyum of Cherus, but in the case of Arba Kosos Mizugim, where he drank them Vavasachas, he does fulfill the mitzvah of Cherus. Now, first, we're going to take a look at the sugya itself. Psachim daf kuf ches, shesan chai yotza, omar Rav yidei yayin yotza, yidei cheres lo yotza. And somehow the Rambam maybe has a different girsa, a different text, we'll see in a minute, but when it says Yotza, Sheson Chai Yotza, and Rava says that means that Yidei Yayin Yotza, Yidei Yayin, according to the Rama, means Yidei Arba Kosos. Sheson V'Vasachas, the Gemara quotes Rav, Yidei Yayin Yotza, which is very strange. Yidei Yayin Yotza should mean Yidei Arba Kosos Yotza. But the Rambam is going to tell us that he was not Yotze Yidei Arba Kosos. Yidei Arba Kosos Lo Yotza. So on the one hand, the Rambam does have a perfect symmetry and reflection of the Gemara in terms of Yidei Arba Kosos. The Gemara says in the name of Rav that Son Vasachas, he drank them consecutively, he did not fulfill the mitzvah of Arba Kosos, and the Rambam codifies that. But on the other hand, what does it mean, Yidei Yayin Yotza? It's interesting because in the case of Chai, Yidei Yayin Yotza, the Rambam interprets mean Yidei Daled Kosos Yotza. You see where the language changes over here. Now, the Brisker Rav quotes Rashi and the Rashbam that Yidei Cheres Lo Yotza, in the case of Chai, Hainu She'ein Zu Mitzvah Shlema. He hasn't completed the mitzvah. And the chashivas of the mitzvah is only with Yayin Mozuk. So it seems that, according to Rashi and the Rashbam, Cherus is an enhancement of the basic mitzvah of Daled Kosos. The mitzvah is enhanced by introducing Yayin Mozug, and in the case of Chai, he forfeits that extra Shleimus HaMitzvah, that extra perfection of the mitzvah. Now, what is Chaf Pei Hey Nun? Ukefi HaNireh, it would seem, the Rotza Lomar, the Lokiem Mitzvah Min HaMuvcha. So the literal words that came out of the mouths of Rashi and the Rashbam was Ein Zu Mitzvah Shlema, and we're interpreting that to mean Shalokiem HaMitzvah Min HaMuvcha. He didn't do it in the ideal way. V'cheni leheja baran sham shekosav zel l'shono klomar shalokie mitzvah min hamuvcha. The Ran adds umiu ein tzarich laksav v'lishtos arba kosas. So even though he did not fulfill the mitzvah min hamuvcha because he didn't have yain mazug, nevertheless there's no need for him if he drank chai to repeat the shtia of the Daled Kosos, because whenever you fulfill the mitzvah in its basic form, that which is critical, although you did not fulfill the mitzvah in a muvchar, you don't have to repeat it in the end. Ubeseifa, Tavishesan Vasachas, Pirshu Rashbam Vitosvis, Sham, the Hodakama Yidayayin Yotza, Ratzaloma the Yotza ben Simchas Yontif. So this is a fulfillment of Simchas Yontif. And I guess what he's saying here is that even in the case of Yayin Chai, he fulfills Simchas Yontif. The basic Simchas Yontif requires Yayin. This is Yayin. Cherus requires an extra beautification, if there is a word, of the Yayin, which is lacking in the case of Yain Chai, and therefore he forfeits the mitzvah of Cherus. But the basic mitzvah of Yain, which these Rishonim identify as what? As Simchas Yontif, that you fulfill. Aval mitzvahs arba kosos lo kiyem. He didn't fulfill 4 kosos because he drank them one after the other. The enam nechshavim el ke'echad. it's as if he drank only one kos. And the mitzvah is to drink 4 kossos. V'zeh nicha lefi girsasam the garsi b'seifa yedei yayin yotza. So yayin means simchas yontiv, and in the case of b'masachas, even though they forfeit the daled kosos, but simcha they have because they drank yayin mazu. I'm a little confused as to why, in the case of yayin chai, it says yidei yayin yotza, which would be in simchas yontiv if it's not mazu. Avolafi girsas harif ve'harambam the garsi yidei cherus yotza. So the Rif and the Rambam, they don't have the girsa in the Masachas of Yidei Yayin Yotza, they have Yidei Cheres Yotza. Imkain, Harei Mairi Zos Midina Mitzvah Shel Dalid Kosos, below Midin Simchas Yontiv. The Rif and the Rambam don't whisper a word about Simchas Yontiv. They're only talking about the Mitzvah Dalid Kosos. Ulefi zeh tzorech bir ikar hach milsa diyotzi yidei cheres v'lo yotzi yidei arba kosos. So according to the girsa of the Rambam, in the case of Masachas, since the yayin is mazug, he fulfills yidei cheres. Now we're talking about Daled Kosos. So what does Yidei Cheres mean? Because Lo Yotzi Yidei Arba Kosos. It's all considered one kos. So Eze Shnei Dvarim Yeshnam Bazeh. What's the difference between Cheres and Daled Kosos? How can you imagine that without fulfilling Daled Kosos, he fulfills the mitzvah of Cheres? The Imlo Kiem Ikar Mitzvah Shel Daled Kosos, my yotzi de cheres. Eze kiyum yesh bazer. You know, we saw before that cheres is an enhancement of the mitzvah namuvchar, but the basic mitzvah, of course, is daled kosos. Here in Masachas, he forfeits the mitzvah daled kosos. How then could he possibly have a mitzvah of cheres? Cheres is only an extension and an embellishment of the mitzvah daled kosos. You've pulled the rug out from underneath Cheres, because Cheres is standing on the shoulders of Daled Kosos, but there's no Daled Kosos here. Ubishleim Aresha, the Yotzi, the Arba Kosos, the Yotzi, the Cheres, Efsha Lefrushe, Kapirush Rash, the Kiyam, Iker Mitzvah Daled Kosos, Lo Kiyam, Osam and Amuvkar, the mitzvah shtia der cheres v'lo b'yayin chai. We understand the ratio in the case of yayin chai, that he fulfills the basic mitzvah daled kosos, but the upper echelons, that upper kiyum of mitzvah and muvchar of derech cheres, that he forfeits. That makes perfect sense. But when we get to the sefer, and we're talking about b'vasachas, the yotzi, the cheres v'lo yotzi, they are kosos. How could that be? How can you say that he fulfills the mitzvah of cheres without fulfilling the mitzvah of daled kosos? You know, you could say, I'm just thinking out loud, that Yidei Cheres Yotza means Heseva. Because as we discussed yesterday, according to the Brisker Rav and the Rambam, you could have a kiyum v'seba even without the matzah and even without the daled kosos during the entire course of the meal. And therefore, even if shesan v'vasakas does not qualify as daled kosos, but it's no worse than the knedluch and the chicken that he's eating, if he ate it v'seba, then yidei cheres yotza means yidei heseba yotza. Heseba is identical with cheres. But the Brisker Rav would not be happy with that shot, because Brisker Rav thinks that we're dealing with the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. We're not dealing with the mitzvah of Cheres as a separate entity, as a separate kiyum of Heseba. The Brisker Rav would agree that through Heseba you could be Makayim the mitzvah of Cheres. But in this context, we're talking about the Yayin. We're talking about whether the Yayin was Mazug or it's Chai. Can you fulfill Daled Kosos? And can you fulfill that mitzvah of Cheres, which is built upon and is an extension of the mitzvah Daled Kosos? Hello, tzorich iyun eze kiyum yesh b'shasiya der Cheres milvana mitzvah shel Daled Kosos v'tzorich iyun. So it would seem that the conclusion to be drawn from this discussion to answer the question, the objection of the Brisker Rav would be the following, that the mitzvah of Daled Kosos has a mitzvah of Derech Cheres inherent in the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. And the kiyum of Derech Cheres is separate from the mitzvah, let's say, for example, of Shtia. Even though, again, he can only achieve Derech Cheres through Shtia, I'm not denying that, but there are two elements of Shtia. The Shtia of Daled Kosos, each one is a separate kos, and he forfeits that when he drinks them all in Masachas. But within the Shtia of Daled Kosos, there's another kiyum of Derech Cheres. So does the mitzvah of Daled Kosos require separating the Kosos one from the other in order to achieve 4 Kosos? And the answer is yes and no. Because it really depends upon which dimension and which kiyum of Daled Kosos you're referring to. If you're referring to the kiyum, the basic kiyum of Daled Kosos to get 4 Kosos, and there's some significance to the number 4, then he forfeits that when he drinks them all masachas consecutively. But if you're talking about the shtia of Derech Cheres, of 4 kosos of yayin, and we're talking about yayin mazud, he can achieve that kiyum of Cheres, of drinking 4 cups of wine, even though he drank them one after the other consecutively. It's not like the case where he poured 4 times the revius into one large kos. He's got 4 kosos of yayin mazud. He drank them one after the other. So he doesn't have that kiyum of 4 kosos. But there's another dimension of the drinking of 4 kosos, which is called Derech Cheres. And that kiyum of Daled Kosos Derech Cheres, he can achieve. So it's clear that we're not talking about Derech Cheres or Yidei Cheres as an extra kiyum on top, the cherry on top, the mitzvah bin amuvchar, the way Rashi and Rashbam see it. No. Derech Cheres is an integral part of the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. However, there's another part of Daled Kosos, which is to drink 4 kosos. Let's say Al Seder HaBrachos. And that separates each kos so that we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 kosos, separate kosos. But as far as Derech Cheres is concerned, we need the physical drinking of 4 kosos of yayin mazud. The physical drinking. We don't need the halachic state of 1 2, 3, 4, separating each kos from the other. That's a legal requirement in order to fulfill the dimension of Dalid kosos. But there's another dimension called Shtia times 4 derech erus. And that he could fulfill with Yayin Mazug, even in Bevasach. What do you say, Rabbi Osai? Does that make sense? Can that justify the Rambam? Jeff, are you there?
I am here.
So do you understand what I'm saying? And do you agree, disagree? Yes. Can the Rambam be saying that in Daled Kosos, there are two different mitzvahs that overlap? One requires separating the kosos, each kos with its own identity, and another just requires the physical drinking of 4 kosos, as long as it's Yain Mazug, and that's called Derech Erus.
And Haseba is Derech Erus. Derech Erus requires Haseba.
Well, yes and no. That's a more complicated, sophisticated question. That's like, let's say you took the basic requirements of the course and now you want to take an extra credit and, hand in a paper. You're talking about something beyond our limited discussion. We're just talking about 2 factors, namely chai as opposed to mazug, and v'vasachas as opposed to al seder abrahos. We haven't discussed haseba. You're right. There's no question that adding haseba introduces another element of derech erus. I wouldn't debate you on that. That's crystal clear. Right. 100% right. Would he fulfill the mitzvah Daled Kosos without haseba? I don't know. Yesterday we discussed eating matzah without haseba, and we suggested in the Rambam, based on the Brisker Rav, that he fulfills his basic mitzvah of matzah without haseba, but there's a separate independent mitzvah of haseba. And that he hasn't fulfilled, but he might be able to fulfill that with the rest of the meal. What about Daled Kosos without haseba? Could be that just like the Rambam, the way we understood it, has haseba as an independent kiyum, and it's not inherent in the matzah, so that if you ate the matzah without haseba, you did fulfill the mitzvah matzah. Could be in Daled Kosos, you could fulfill the mitzvah of cherus by simply drinking the wine. This is beautiful wine, it's diluted, it's tasty. That itself is a demonstration of cherus, and you mekayim and you achieve the derech cherus kiyum even without haseba. Haseba now remains as a separate independent kiyum.
And that would be true even if you only drank 1 kos?
No, we're saying that each one of the kosos has an element of derech cherus to it, as long as it's mazug. And the halacha establishes that kiyum of derech cherus requires shti of Daled Kosos. But again, when we say shti of Daled Kosos, we mean the physical drinking of 4 kosos. You got 4 kosos. I don't care at what sequence and at what pace and rate you drink the 4 kosos. The totality of 4 kosos of yayin with a shtia, a basic physical shtia, generates a kiyum of derech cherus. There's another dimension of Daled Kosos that requires that each kos be a separate kos, split, as it were, separated one kos from the other by the brachos that are appropriate for each one of the kosos. So you have to identify the kos as, call it a kos shel kiddush, kos shel haggadah, etc., in order to achieve that kiyum of Daled Kosos. But even without identifying the kosos with its own tag, its own name tag, its own personality, this one kiddush, this one Birkas Hamazon, etc., even lacking that, if you drank 4 kosos, and this is wonderful yayin, this is the best wine it's diluted properly, it's got a taste that's out of this world, it's coming from the Golan, it's Israeli produced, whatever you want. So you have a kiyum of derech cheres. And that's what the Rambam is trying to say. You see, the question of the Brisker Rav is based on, in a sense, the understanding of Rashi and the Rashbam, that derech cheres is a kiyum on top of Dalit Kosos. It's an embellishment of Dalit Kosos. It's a mitzvah and a muvchar of Dalit Kosos, but it's not an essential part of the mitzvah and the chova of Dalit Kosos. And therefore, how could it be that in Sheson v'Masachas, and the Rambam says you did not fulfill the mitzvah of Dalit Kosos, you can fulfill the mitzvah of Derech Cheres? Yidei Yayin Yotza means Derech Cheres? You don't even have Dalit Kosos. But that's only true according to Rashi and Rashbam. We're suggesting that according to the Rambam Shita, it's not so that Derech Cheres is, pardon the expression, a cherry on top. It's just a mitzvah and a muvchar that's built on Dalit Kosos. But rather it's inherent in the kiyum of Dalit Kosos, because Dalit Kosos is a two-dimensional mitzvah. It's got the dimension of 4 separate kosos, with each kos having its own identity, its own bracha, and it's a kiyum of demonstrating cheres simply because I drank 4 cups of wonderful wine. Those 2 dimensions of Dalit Kosos are inherent in the very fabric of the mitzvah Dalit Kosos, the way that Chazal orchestrated it. That's what we're suggesting in the realm. So let's see the Brisker Rav inside, and we'll make a comparison between our understanding of the Rambam and his, and hopefully it's identical. Adira longer vira David the bemis trey mili ika bahach mitzvah darba kostini tosreish perek arvi psachim al hodis nan lo yifkusu lo arba kosos kosvus al shono mitoch al lashon. Right, it says lo yifkusu lo in the singular. Mashma, it implies ktsas she'ein nosen lebanim lebeso kim liatzma. We only supply the head of the household with Dalit Kosos. They don't have their own Dalit Kosos. And Tosas Farahi, the Maishno Arba Kosos mi Kiddush, the Kol HaShodah Shechet Motzias Kula. Ukvar Shamati mi Adoni, Avi, Mori, Varabi, Agon, Zecher, Tzadik Levracha. He's referring to his father of Chaim. Shetam al Divrei Tosas Elu, the Mai Inyan Arba Kosos Kiddush, the Kol HaShodah. Is this a valid analogy? Deriving from Kiddush that only one person has to drink from the kos. A conclusion in Arba Kosos, Hasam mitzvah bracha. There in Kiddush, the mitzvah's recitation of the bracha of Kiddush. V'zeu ikar Kiddush, u'bazev hidina shomer ka'ona. So everyone at the table hears the Kiddush from the Mekadosh and fulfills his basic chiyuv. Amal bi'arba kosos halo ikar mitzvah yashasiya shel arba kosos. The mitzvah is the drinking of the 4 kosos. Uma shaykh lahotzi bazeh. All right, you've supplied the head of the household with 4 kosos. He'll drink the kosos. But no one else is drinking the kosos. There's no shomer ka'ona on shasiya. Shomer ka'ona is halacha in recitation. You heard someone else's recitation, it's as if you recite it yourself. But as far as shti is concerned, that's a mitzvah shebegufo. Each person has to personally drink the shtia, and there's no such thing as vicarious shtia. So how could Tosfos say, based on an analogy to Kiddush, where the mitzvah is the bracha, that in Dalit Kosos, all we have to do is supply the head of the household with Dalit Kosos, for hu yotzias kulam? Where's the shtia? And that's the essence of the mitzvah. And Reb Chaim derived from this, the Spirulei Latosvis, Shegam bi'arba kosos, ein ikar mitzvah shtias hakosos, chak habrachos she'al hakos. Mamish dugmas kiddush l'kol hashana v'kol kosa shel bracha ad kan var. Tosis is identifying Daled Kosos with Daled Kosos Shel Bracha. And that's the mitzvah. There's no mitzvah shtiyas Daled Kosos. We've been fooling ourselves, thinking and believing that there's a mitzvah to drink the Daled Kosos. By the way, some people believe that in Kiddush there's a mitzvah drinking from the Kiddush. That's not really so. I mean, you need that the bracha be related to the kos through shtia, but that's not a separate mitzvah shtia. Haraya, shtios mitztarfos. You could have Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. Each one eats a third of a revius, and it's mitztaret. And shtia requires a mole lugmov, which is at least a rov revius. So Reb Chaim is saying that according to Tosas, what's Arba Kosa? It's Arba Kosa Shel Bracha. It's not a mitzvah shtia. Hence, we don't require that each person at the table get his own personal set of Daled Kosos. Echad Motzias Kulam, exactly as we do it in Kiddush. Now, it works out nicely in the sense that we're lucky here that each one of the kosos has a separate bracha. So we have kosos shel bracha. It would be bad news if one of the four kosos did not have a bracha. Then for sure that it's a shtia. Okay. So this is a very radical, almost extreme definition of Daled Kosos, which completely strips the mitzvah of shtia and reduces it to Daled Kosos Shel Bracha. And in this context, I would raise the old chakira that we had in the past about whether it's one mitzvah of Daled Kosos or four separate independent mitzvahs. What would be your opinion in the light of Reb Chaim's presentation of Tosfos? Correct. It's four separate mitzvahs. It's not one entity, composite, made up of four kosos. Each kos is a kos shel bracha. Okay, the total number here happens to be four, but that's just coincidental. It could have been three, it could have been five. It happens to be that there are four brachos that form the fabric, the constitution of the night of the Seder, the four brachos. And each bracha requires a kos. Could there have been three brachas? Why not? Could it have been five brachas? Why not? And each kos has its own bracha, and the mitzvah is to recite the bracha over a kos. So, for example, let's say he ran out of wine when he got to Hallel. Did he therefore forfeit the mitzvah of Daled Kosos? Absolutely not. He forfeited the mitzvah of kos shel bracha with regard to Hallel. That bracha is missing a kos. It's an incomplete mitzvah as far as Hallel. But as far as the other three brachas, Kiddush, Magid, and Birkas Hamazon, he has three complete mitzvahs. Each one is a kos shel bracha. Nothing is missing. V'ochiach mizeh, Tisfila tosa gam biabakos ein ikar mitzvah b'shtia. V'chedi muchar gami divrei agra b'shulchan aruch or Chaim Siman Reish Ayin Aleph Sif Yudal. Al Hadis is Sham b'shulchan aruch. Pluktas harosh v'atosus b'koshel kiddush. Im shtias shnayim mitztarefes lemoli lugmov. Umevi agra mekar l'shitas harosh. The ein shtias shnayim mitztarefes. Mihad the Amrina Pesachim Dafku Chesam and Beis, V'hu the Ashti Ruba the Kosa. V'yesh Omrim, which I guess means a second opinion. Sfir Lahud, V'hu Koi Akulam Yacha. In other words, when it says in the Gemara Pesachim, V'hu the Ashte Ruba the Kosa, it doesn't mean that he himself and each person at the Seder has to drink a Rov Kos, but Akulam Yachad, the totality of all the Shtios equals Rov Kos. Let's call it Mole Lugma. So you see that the Gaon's presentation is based on an analogy, an equation between Kiddush and Daled Kosos. In Kiddush, we have machlokas where the Shtiyos mitztarfos, whether it's enough that the totality, the sum total of all the different Shtiyos of those who heard the Kiddush equals Rov Kos. And the same thing is going to apply in Daled Kosos. And we go back to the Gemara in Pesachim Kufches, and we have two interpretations of the Gemara. What does Gemara mean when it says V'hu the Ashti Ruba the Kosa? That means each person has to drink Rov Kos, or together, sum total is Rov Kos. But it means that even in Daled Kosos, according to that second man, the Omer, Shtiyos Mitztarfos. How is that possible? Is mevur midivrei agra delamande islay the shtia shnayim mitztarefes is gam ba'arba kosos adin came. On the contrary, the issue in Kiddush really depends upon arba kosos. The Gaon says that the source for requiring in Kiddush that one person drink a Rov Kos is the Gemara Pesachim with regard to Daled Kosos. Shma mino desfila agra, the ain't tzarich lishtos biatzma arba kosos. Rak havyin kikol kos shel bracha nichol loseis gam li acher lishtos ubevad shetehei shtia mea kos. At the end of the day, from this kos there was a shtia that was made up of many different shtios of Rov Kos. And the Gaon applies that opinion to Daled Kosos. V'lo od elo de lefi perusho shel agra libadat tosus the hach vehu diashti koya kula biyachad that Tosfos against the Rosh holds that's kula b'yachad, and all the shtiyos on mitztarfos, we integrate them into one shtiya from the kos. Im kein alo zeh zeu ikar adin anemar b'divrei Shmuel v'hishka mehem lebanav l'nei beisa yotza the ain't tzarech lishtos bi'atzmo gakam shtiyosam mitztaref. So we're going to fast forward for the time being, and we'll leave out the brackets. The Imkain, it's about 8-9 lines down on page Ches, which is the equivalent of page 15. He says, the Imkain are mavur lehedja the ikar mitzvah shal arba kosos he habrachos shal kosos ushtiyosam he kechol shtiya shal koshal bracha delo ichpaslan im amavarch bi'atzmo shoso achet. So again, this is one opinion which the Gaon presents as the opinion of Tosfos and the Rosh. That is a halacha in Daled Kosos of Shtiyas Mitztarfos, and we don't require that each person drink the kos. And that means that we assume an absolute equation between Daled Kosos and Koshel Bracha. And that same halach that applies to Koshel Bracha, according to the Shita, that Shtiyas Mitztarfos applies to Daled Kosos. And that's one view. Ulam nira to Doverzeh b'machlokas shnuya. We don't assume that it's universally accepted that Shtiyos Mitztarfos. Divrei Agra nemru rak lefi shitas hatosva rosh bi'atzma shekosu lichol lahotzi gam acherim bi'arba kosos. That Tosfos and the Rosh were medayik from the word lo in the Mishnah at the beginning of Arba Pesachim, that one person could be motzi the others in the mitzvah Daled Kosos. Who, according to Shitas Tosfos Rosh, Pal Karchach Ikar HaMitzvah Shal Arba Kosos Hirak HaBrachos L'chud. So that's one opinion. The Hine B'Tosfos Pesachim Daf Kuv Zayin Kosu D'Shira D'Mali Lugma B'Odam Beinani Hu Rov Gevius Min Amrina L'Kamon V'Hu B'Ashte Ruba De Kosa Alma De Ruba De Kosu Mali Lugma. So V'Hu Ashte Ruba De Kosa means that he only fulfills his mitzvah if he drank Mali Lugma. V'chein Kosu V'Divreim L'Kamon Daf Kuv Ches. So we also find this later on Daf Kuf Ches. The Kaomer Gemara Ruba de Kosa Hainu Kemoli Lugmog Ayin Shom B'Divrayim Mevur Mized the Svila Kosos the Gam Gabi Arba Kosos Ikar Shir Ashtia Midina Hu Moli Lugmog Kemo Babi Kos Shel Kiddush the Mevur Liel B'Daf Kuf Zayin the Shir Teimaso Himoli Lugma, who had in Bechol Kos Shel Bracha. So it means that Daled Kosos is representative of any Kos Shel Bracha, and you must drink Himoli Lugma. V'hada Kamar Gemara Acha Ruba de Kosa Lav Dinahu Rak Mishum de Kach Hu Shiura de Moli Lugma Shal Adam Beinin. Aval Ika Ashir Toli B'Melo Lugma. So you can't really identify it as let's say a revius, because Biog Melch HaBoshon, the MS Be'inin Tfei Miruba. Now he has a large Moli Lugma, so he'll require more than Rov Kos. If Rov Kos is, let's say, a revius, or most of a revius. But we're saying that Moli Lugma is something subjective. It depends on each person individually, how much is Moli Lugma. So for Og Melech HaBoshon, his Moli Lugma is a lot greater than yours and mine. So he will need more than Rov Kos. Ulam Ba'Rambam Perek Zayin Mehilchus Chometz Matzalach and Teskos Del Shodo Him Shosa Mikol Kos Mehen Rubo Yotza. So Ram doesn't even mention this Moli Lugma business. Oh, why I can't fix it? So he says, Lo Hiskir Klal Hacha Shiur de Moli Lugma Kmo Gabi Kiddush V'Perek Chav Tes Milchus Shabbos Mashles Svile Derak Gabi Kiddush Hu Davi Shiur Ti Masa Moli Lugma. Amal Gabi Abrakosos Be'inin Dafka Ruba de Kosa. Right, the Rama mentions in Daled Kosos Rov Kos. The Rama mentions in Kiddush Moli Lugma. So it means that in Daled Kosos, it's not enough to drink Moli Lugma. Otherwise, the Rama would have said Moli Lugma, like he says by Kiddush. Apparently, in Daled Kosos, you need more than Moli Lugma, you need Rov Kos. And that would depend upon the size of the cost. But if you have a large cost, then Rov Kos is certainly more than Moli Lugma. The Cheni Gam Shitas Rambam, who Vada Beis Yosef, Shulchan Aruch Archaim, etc., etc. The Gamim HaKos Gadol, it's a very tall cost. Umachse Kama Revios, Tzarech Lishtos Rov Kos. Harei Lehedu, this really the Ein Ashir Moli Lugma, as it is by Kiddush. Rak Be'inon Dafka Ruba de Kosa Midina. In the case of Daled Kos, you need Rov Kos. Moli Lugma is not going to do it. The Cheni Leheja, the Chen Kosa Leheja Haran, the Pergav Pesachim, the Chalik Ben Kiddush L'Arba Kosas, the Gabi Kiddush Shir had the Ima, he Moli Lugma, the Gabi Daled Kosas Be'inin Dafka Ruba de Kosa. So why is it that the shear of Daled Kosos exceeds beyond the shear of Kiddush? Kiddush, all you need is Moli Lugma, which he calls Te'ima, and Daled Kosos needs Rov Kos, which might be much, much more than Moli Lugma. The time of the Inu Spirale, the Rakabi Kiddush V'Shar Kos Shal Bracha, the Ikim El Sayri HaBracha Shal, El Dedina Hu De Mevarech HaMevarech Sorach Sheyitom. So the mitzvah is really the bracha in the case of Kiddush and all Kol Shal Bracha. Just you need Te'ima, but Zeu Da'avi Shiur K'Moli Lugma. Moli Lugma, even though it's very small, very limited in quantity, nevertheless it suffices because it's Te'ima. Aval Gabi Abrakosis Tal Mitzvi Shtias Kos Al Kain Tzorch Lishtos Kulo Dafka V'Rak Begubo Sagi Mishum Ruba Kekulo Aval Shiur the Moli Lugma Lo Shayach Hacha Klal. Now, I'm not sure I understand 100% why shtia has to mean rov kos. But let's say it in one direction. And that is, if I require rov kos, then it must be because of shtia. I don't think I can prove and establish beyond the shadow of a doubt that if there's a mitzvah of shtia, it's got to be rov kos. I don't see why that has to be. No, there's nothing compelling me to assume that if there's a mitzvah shtia, you got to drink rov kos and nothing less. But once we have the contrast, where in Kiddush you don't need rov kos, and all you need is moli lugma. Whereas in Daled Kosos you're going to require rov kos, which is more than moli lugma, then it's logical to assume that the reason for that distinction or that chiluk is because whereas Kiddush the Iker mitzvah is on the bracha, and Daled Kosos the Iker mitzvah is on the shtia. The Alkain, therefore, in Daled Kosos, where the mitzvah is on shtia, tzarech lishtos kulo or rubo kekulo. But the shear of moli lugma, we'll call it like a te'ima, lo shayach hacha klal. That minimum shear of moli lugma, which is te'ima, that's only relevant to a kosher bracha, to kiddush, but not to Daled Kosos, where you will require rov kos because of the mitzvah shtir. I think what the Brisker Rav understands here, just occurred to me, is that shtir is not just in the gavra, but it's also in the chefts of the kos. And that's why you need rov kos. See, I always thought that that's the difference between shtia and a kosher bracha. That a kosher bracha is purely a din in the kos. The gavra is not involved in shtia; he's only drinking moli lugma, or maybe even less than that, because shtios mitztarfa. So it's not a din in the gavra and of obligating him to shtia, but rather it's a din in the kos be nishter. It's like in Korban Pesach, it's not a din in how much you have to eat, but the korban itself has to be nechal. But in Daled Kosos, where there's a chovas gavra of shtia, then you have to personally drink from the kos, but now the Brisker Rav is adding, you have to drink rov of the kos. That piece, I don't know why it has to be so. But I grant you that there is a difference between the mitzvah Daled Kosos and the mitzvah of kosher bracha, because in kosher bracha all you need is moli lugma, whereas in Daled Kosos you need rov kos. But I don't think that a priori, just because it's a mitzvah shtia, it requires rov kos. Dizeu shir hanemar b'din te'ima. Moli lugma is enough for te'ima. But v'lo hacha, the be'inan shtias hakos. The shub matzasi shekain kos of the bach. Al koduk muvur said the kulu hanerav vasa the svirule the ikra mitzvah shel Daled Kosos. He b'shtias hakosos. Below bebrachas greda, ubeemes shekain mevur lehedje beloshen arama perik zayin v'zel shona kol echad v'echad chayav lishtos b'layla hazeh arba kos shel yain. Each person individually has to drink the kosos. Harei dikar mitzvah lishtos. But according to Tosfos, that kiddush and arba kosos both have the identical halachas of moli lugma. It means zikr mitzvahs on the bracha, and you need to mitzaref the bracha to the kos through te'ima. The sfir lahu, according to Tosfos, the Daled Kosos shamin, the ikar dinam lechol kosos shel bracha. And arba kosos, the ikar mitzvah, is the bracha on the kosos. Therefore, all we need is te'ima, like any kosher bracha, and we have an opinion in Tosfos and the Rosh that not everyone has to drink his own kos. So that leads us to Lefi Zeh on the left column, on page Ches, or the equivalent to page 15, which I'd like to finish up tomorrow so that we have the entire picture of the Brisker Rav. Okay then? So let me wish you a great day. And thank you so much.